The past 7 days have brought a whirlwind of new developments. And on March 2nd, Tommaso Cion made his first public appearance in weeks. Seen arm in arm with Annie and Savannah Guthrie as they approach the memorial set up outside NY's residence. Almost immediately, online communities began analyzing his walk against that of the man on the porch, and his height against Savannah's, using frame-by-frame comparisons. That particular discussion continues to rage, and it's a topic we will revisit later. However, another event occurred this week that has been largely overlooked, yet is critically important. On March 6th, federal agents and Puma County detectives began canvassing NY's neighborhood door-to-door. Their questions weren't about strange cars or unfamiliar people in the area, and instead, they focused entirely on Wi-Fi connectivity. They wanted to know if anyone had experienced issues with their internet service on the evening Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And their discoveries completely upend our entire understanding of the individual responsible for this crime. Several residents in the Catalina foothills confirmed to NBC News that investigators told them numerous locals had noted internet problems on the evening of February 1st. Brian Enton of News Nation shared that one neighbor, living very close to NIY's home, discovered his Ring camera's recorded history for that particular night was simply gone. Not just damaged or recorded over, but completely unavailable, which was unprecedented for his system. But this next piece of information is what truly gave me pause. Not every camera on the neighbor's property malfunctioned. It was only the cameras on the side of his house that directly faced NY's home. All the cameras on the opposite side of that very same house remained operational all night long, and they were all connected to the identical router, network, and power source. Yet, only the cameras with a clear view of NY's property lost their signal, which wasn't a widespread internet failure, and it was no accident. This was deliberate. At this point, I have to break down the technical details, since the term Wi-Fi jammer conjures the wrong image for most people, and the gap between that common perception and what probably took place on February 1st is like comparing a sledgehammer to a surgeon's knife. A standard Wi-Fi jammer is essentially a brute force tool. It overwhelms the radio frequency spectrum, specifically the 2.4 and 5 GHz bands your router relies on, with disruptive static. Imagine it as someone shouting at the top of their lungs in a quiet library. Any electronic device in its vicinity becomes unable to send or receive signals. We're talking about your phone, your cameras, your smart thermostat, and even a pacemaker's Bluetooth link. Everything goes silent. The effective area of disruption is determined by the unit's power. However, even an inexpensive jammer, bought for $30 to $50, can disable signals in a radius of 10 to 30 yards. But that isn't what occurred at NY's residence. The reason we know this is because NY's Nest camera was still able to record footage, which allowed the FBI to retrieve pictures and video of the suspect on the porch. Had a brute force jammer been active, that camera would have been rendered useless before the perpetrator even got to the front door. Furthermore, NY's pacemaker kept its Bluetooth link to her Apple products active until 2:28 a.m., a full 41 minutes after the camera was manually shut down. A conventional jammer would have severed that connection instantly. This apparent inconsistency was pointed out in public by retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffinder. She stated that whatever was used to cause the interference wasn't a total Wi-Fi jammer, since it failed to obstruct the Nest camera's transmission or the pacemaker's data feed. She contended that this evidence suggests a far more precise methodology. So what actually took place? A third kind of device exists, one that is unfamiliar to the vast majority of people. This tool doesn't disrupt signals by overwhelming the spectrum with static. It instead transmits something known as deauthentication packets. These are commands that appear to be authentic within the Wi-Fi protocol, instructing a particular device to sever its connection to the network. The router gets this command and assumes it originated from the device. And meanwhile, the device gets the same command and believes it was sent by the router. Each end is tricked into thinking the other one started the disconnection process. The outcome is identical to what a jammer achieves, and the camera is knocked offline, but the technique employed is precise and surgical, not simply chaotic. This type of deauthentication assault can be directed at targeted devices, on a chosen network, and from a particular angle. It doesn't take down everything in the area. only the specific targets you aim for. And this would perfectly account for why the cameras aimed toward N. Y's home went black, even as those on the opposite side of the same house kept working. They shared the same network and router, but were in a different line of attack with different objectives. So let me explain this more simply. Picture yourself standing out in the desert, situated between two homes at 2 o'clock in the morning. In your pocket is a gadget about the size of a cell phone, and you aim this device in the direction of the neighbor's residence. The tool then scans for and locates every camera linked to that home's Wi-Fi system, and transmits disconnect orders only to the units within its focused beam, which are the ones pointed right at you. Meanwhile, the cameras located on the far side of the building, which are physically blocked by the house itself, are never affected by the command and remain fully operational. You've effectively engineered a gap in the local surveillance network without physically interacting with any cameras, severing any cables, or leaving behind any trace evidence. And the resident won't discover the breach until the following morning, when they review their video feed and find a blank space labeled "not available." This isn't just a theory, because these deauthentication gadgets are sold on the open market. They are compact enough to be carried in a pocket, and some can even be controlled using a smartphone. You can buy one for under $50, and in contrast to brute force jammers, they create virtually no forensic trail since the instructions they transmit are indistinguishable from regular network activity. One former Puma County deputy verified that these tools can be purchased on the internet for less than $30. So now, let's revisit the FBI video footage. The individual on N. Y's porch clearly has an object in his pocket, showing an antenna and a distinct shape that isn't consistent with a cell phone. Former FBI agent Tracy Walder pointed this out publicly, suggesting it might be either a walkie-talkie or some kind of signal-blocking device. Each of these possibilities is significant, but for very different reasons. If the object was, in fact, a walkie-talkie, it means the suspect was in constant communication with an accomplice. This accomplice could have been waiting in a car, positioned as a lookout, or getting live updates on how the plan was unfolding, which would prove it was a two-person job and imply another electronic device exists that might have contacted a cell tower or created some other digital footprint. But if it was a deauthentication tool, then the suspect was waging a sophisticated electronic attack against the local surveillance network at the very same time they were carrying out an abduction. That degree of technical expertise is completely at odds with the inexpensive backpack, the improperly worn holster, and the $70 crime kit. A person who uses a deauthentication device is not the same person who fumbles with basic equipment like a holster. One of these personas represents the real perpetrator, and the other is just a disguise. Regardless of whether it was a walkie-talkie or a jammer, the theory of a $20 backpack amateur falls apart right here. And this introduces a legal angle that has been largely ignored. Employing a Wi-Fi jammer or a deauthentication tool constitutes a federal offense, and the Federal Communications Commission explicitly forbids the use, advertisement, or distribution of any equipment intended to obstruct, jam, or disrupt legitimate radio transmissions. Breaking this law can lead to penalties as high as $100,000 for each violation, along with jail time. This means the FBI is pursuing more than just a kidnapping investigation. They now have an additional federal crime that creates a whole new line of inquiry, including purchase histories, delivery addresses, web search logs, and browsing data from any gadget linked to the suspect's personal accounts. Should the device have been purchased over the internet, a record of that sale is stored on a server, and if a shipment was made, the destination address is logged in a company's fulfillment system. If the perpetrator looked up how to jam Ring cameras or researched deauthentication tools prior to February 1st, that query is saved in their browser's history or within their internet service provider's logs. The tool itself also leaves behind a distinct signal footprint, and FBI analysts are currently charting precisely which cameras failed and which continued to function. Once finished, this map will reveal the exact coverage area, including the effective range and the direction of the device that was used. That signal footprint pinpoints a specific location, and it will show detectives the exact spot where the device was located at the moment it was turned on. If the tool was inside the suspect's pocket on N.Y.'s porch, the signal's origin will be her property, and if it was located inside a car parked on the road, the signal's origin will be the street. If it had been placed in a stationary spot earlier that night, perhaps concealed in the desert area between the houses, then the signal will originate from that fixed point. Each possibility refines the physical layout, and that layout, in turn, helps to zero in on the suspect. Now, let's link this information with the vehicle footage that has previously been uncovered. A Ring camera located 2.5 miles from N.Y.'s home, well beyond the initial search area, recorded a vehicle at 2:36 a.m. and N.Y.'s pacemaker lost its connection at 2:28. That drive takes approximately 6 minutes, and the sheriff has verified the timeline is consistent. The distant camera was functioning perfectly, but the cameras right next to N.Y.'s house were not. Assuming the deauthentication tool was on the suspect's person, its effective range would have been confined to the area directly surrounding N.Y.'s property. As soon as the suspect left in a vehicle, any cameras beyond that limited radius would have remained completely untouched. The evidence points directly to this conclusion, because the cameras closest to Nancy were disabled. Yet, cameras 2.5 meters further away captured the suspect's vehicle leaving the scene. The device clearly had a limited operational range. This was a precise operation, and that level of precision suggests careful planning, testing, and a degree of technical expertise that an ordinary intruder simply wouldn't have. Eric Maldonado dedicated 29 years of his career to the Puma County Sheriff's Office. He specialized in investigating burglaries in the Catalina foothills, which is the very neighborhood Nancy called home. In a discussion with Brian Anton, he detailed 3 separate methods of disrupting signals. These include cell phone jammers, Wi-Fi blockers, and deauthentication tools that trick a network into thinking services down. He pointed out that the equipment is inexpensive. Some of these devices can be purchased for less than $30 and are widely available. But Maldonado also offered a theory that has haunted me ever since I first heard it. He proposed that the suspect might not just live near the neighborhood, but actually within it. His logic for this is very specific. Drawing on 3 decades of handling cases in that exact part of town, he recalled burglaries in the Catalina foothills where the offenders lived on the very same street as their victims. He noted that most people believe criminals travel from other areas to commit their offenses. However, in his professional experience, it happens quite often that someone targets a house they walk past daily because the reconnaissance work is already complete. They are already aware of the daily schedules. They already can tell which cars are local and which ones are not. They have already noted which homes have security cameras and which ones are unprotected. The kind of intelligence that would require weeks for an outsider to compile is the sort of information a neighbor absorbs passively. If the perpetrator is a resident, their phone's appearance in the cell tower records isn't suspicious. It is supposed to be there. This wouldn't set off any alarms in a geofence analysis because the phone is located exactly where it should be. Authorities are searching for a device that seems out of place. Any search for a phone that first appeared in the area on February 1st would be pointless, because the phone in question has been there consistently for months, or perhaps even years. Maldonado also shared a thought on why Nancy's body was removed that I have been unable to forget. He explained that Nancy herself was the crime scene. Her body would contain the suspect's DNA, maybe under her fingernails from a fight, on her clothes from being grabbed, or on her skin from touched DNA. The perpetrator knew this. Everybody is aware of this. Every lawbreaker in this country knows that DNA is the primary thing that will connect you to your crime. The pills left on the table, the wallet left untouched. Nothing was taken from the house because theft was not the objective. The one and only piece of evidence that could positively identify the attacker was Nancy herself, so they took her with them. This particular theory would answer one of the most stubborn questions of this entire investigation. After more than 5 weeks, with cell data dumps from numerous days, and with the complete digital forensic power of the FBI at their disposal, not a single suspect has been flagged based on phone records. In almost every kidnapping case today, analyzing cell tower data typically narrows down the list of potential suspects within a few days. The phone that was close to the backward walker's test location on January 23rd and also near Nancy's house on February 1st should have been pinpointed by now, unless that phone belongs in the area, making its presence on those days completely normal. Now, you have to connect this deauthentication event to the local geography. Whoever used that tool knew exactly which cameras they needed to disable. They didn't just knock out all the cameras on the neighboring property, but only the ones aimed at Nancy's house. This demands knowing the specific direction each camera is pointed. This demands knowing the exact line of sight that exists between the neighbor's property and Nancy's property. This demands an intimate knowledge of the physical setup of multiple houses on that street. It's not just about the target's house, but about understanding the entire surveillance grid around it. An outsider entering the Catalina foothills for the first time would not have this information. An outsider would have no idea which cameras point in which directions. An outsider would be ignorant of the angles. An outsider would not know where the coverage gaps are. That kind of information is gathered by spending considerable time in the area, by driving those roads over and over, by walking by those houses, and subconsciously logging the camera's locations, just like you'd log a traffic light on your daily drive until it's second nature. Let's consider what we've already established. The suspect from January 23rd, the man walking backward, was conducting a test to see how Ring cameras would react to being approached in reverse, 6.5 meters from Nancy's own house. He selected a place within the Catalina foothills that had identical dark sky regulations, similarly isolated desert properties, and the same kinds of long driveways. He wasn't choosing a house at random. He was picking out a practice environment. When a dog barked, he fled. But he never turned around, always keeping his back to the camera. He was more willing to risk a fall than to show his face for a single second. That level of control doesn't come from being scared. It comes from a person who has carefully studied how these specific cameras operate. 9 days later, on February 1st, that very same person, or someone with the exact same distinct Ozark Trail backpack, appeared on Nancy's front porch. But on this occasion, he was not moving backward. He was composed. He tapped the camera on the door twice, but the cameras on the house next door had already been rendered useless. The test on January 23rd showed him how the cameras would operate. The actions on February 1st proved he knew precisely which cameras to blind before he even set foot on the property. That clear progression of test, learn, and then execute is not the action of someone exploring a new neighborhood. It is the action of a person perfecting a plan in a place they are already deeply familiar with. And there is one more digital trail in this case that has been given virtually no public attention. A digital forensics specialist who was part of the Brian Koberger investigation mentioned that if the suspect's phone had Wi-Fi turned on, her home router could have logged probe requests, even if he never joined her network. Our smartphones are constantly sending these out. They announce the names of networks they've used before as they scan the area for a connection. If the attacker's phone came within range of Nancy's router while its Wi-Fi was on, the router's internal logs might hold a record of that specific phone, looking for its own home network. That is a network name that could potentially reveal the suspect's address, their internet company, or maybe even their name. That piece of data, should it exist, is stored on Nancy's router at this very second. The FBI is in possession of the router, and unlike DNA evidence that requires months of processing in a Florida laboratory, router logs can be examined within hours. Every single device that passed near Nancy's network on the evening of February 1st might have left behind a fingerprint, not a biological one, but a digital signature, a MAC address, a device name, or a list of prior networks that could reveal to police where that phone has been, where it goes routinely, and where it considers home. If the suspect was meticulous enough to take down the neighbor's cameras, were they also meticulous enough to switch off their own phone's Wi-Fi signal? Did they take the additional step of putting it into airplane mode? Or were they so thorough as to leave it behind at home? This highlights the central paradox of using electronic cloaking methods. The more complex a suspect's methods, the more trails of evidence that vary complexity leaves behind. A jamming device is tied to a sales record. A deauthentication device is tied to a manufacturer. Activating airplane mode creates a time-stamped log on the cell provider's system. A hole in the data can be just as telling as the data itself. The lack of a signal at 1:47 a.m. from a phone that normally pings that tower every single night is not an act of disappearing. It is the equivalent of a flare going up. The dog is important here, too. And I stress this point because so many cases get bogged down in details that ultimately mean nothing. But this particular detail is very specific. The same neighbor whose security cameras were taken offline informed Brian Anton that their dog woke them from a deep sleep that night. This occurred at the precise moment that everything else was taking place. The dog was demanding to be let outside, which the owner said was extremely unusual for him. This dog normally sleeps straight through the night, every single night. But on that night, at that time, it woke up and was insistent on going out. And when the dog was finally outside, it was staring directly at Nancy's house. It wasn't barking at a wild animal in the gully. It wasn't chasing a rabbit. It was looking intently at Nancy's property at the very moment the cameras pointed that way went dead. Maldonado commented on this directly. He stated that dogs are probably still the single best home alarm system you can have. Their power to detect frequencies that humans can't hear is simply incredible. We don't know if the dog sensed an electronic signal from the jamming tool, heard quiet footsteps in the brush between the two homes, or simply perceived a presence that the cameras were no longer able to see. It was reacting to something tangible at the exact time the technology was being subverted. That is not just a coincidence. It is a piece of corroborating evidence from the oldest security system in the world. A dog could perceive what the security cameras were suddenly unable to capture. Now, let's pull back to take in the entire situation. The evening Nancy was abducted, an individual used some kind of tool that specifically took surveillance cameras aimed at her house offline. This person was aware of exactly which cameras to disable and the directions they were pointing. They carried this out in a community where homes are situated far from one another, where residents recognize all the local vehicles, and where an unknown car parked on the street would have been reported by a neighbor before sunrise. They left no trace of any cell tower anomalies, even though the FBI analyzed data dumps for numerous days. They remained inside the home for 41 minutes. They made their way through the darkness without any sign of uncertainty. They left the specific medication that was necessary to keep their captive alive. And they carried away the one thing that held their DNA, Nancy herself, which was the most significant piece of evidence. Every clue in this investigation points to the very same conclusion. It wasn't a stranger, it wasn't a random crime of opportunity, and it wasn't a drifter just passing by. It was someone who was familiar with the area, familiar with the cameras, familiar with the home's layout, and familiar with Nancy's routines. Someone who had been on those roads so frequently that their phone, their car, and their very being would not seem out of place to any human or digital system monitoring the vicinity. This investigation isn't stalling. It is focusing. Just this week, a specialized task force came together. It's made up of 4 detectives and a sergeant from the Puma County Sheriff's Department, who are now assigned full-time to an FBI building in Tucson. That is not how you structure a cold case investigation. That kind of organization is for building a case for prosecution. You don't transfer local police into a federal facility simply to sift through old information. You take that step when you're constructing a specific case and you require the local detectives and the federal agents to examine the identical evidence in the same room at the very same time. Savannah Guthrie made an appearance at the Today Show studio on Thursday. She intends to make a full return to the program. However, she also mentioned that the family is aware Nancy might not be alive anymore. They have come to terms with that outcome. What they haven't come to terms with, and what they refuse to accept, is not having her whereabouts confirmed. The FBI is finally posing the correct questions. Agents are now going from one house to the next. They're making inquiries about interruptions in internet service. They're also asking about outages with Ring security cameras. They are piecing together a map showing which devices precisely went dark, at what specific time, and in which particular direction. Once that map is fully assembled, it will reveal the signature of the device that was used, where it was located, the extent of its range, and what it did not affect. That signature represents a specific spot, and that spot is where the culprit was positioned when they activated the device. Now, allow me to circle back to something I said I would address. The memorial service, March 2nd. Tommaso Cion was seen walking alongside Savannah and Annie to Nancy's residence for the first time in many weeks. For a whole month, Tommaso had been completely out of sight. Every single member of the Guthrie family had made an appearance before a camera. Savannah had uploaded emotional video messages. She put forward a $1 million reward. She broke down on camera and declared, "Every hour has been agony." Cameron made a direct appeal to the abductor on video. Annie gave her full cooperation to the investigators. Tommaso, however, said nothing, did nothing in public, never issued a statement, never showed up in a video, and never stood by his wife as she pleaded with the entire world to help find her mother. Journalist Brian Anton informed Megyn Kelly that Tommaso, easily recognizable with his large beard, had not been spotted in nearly a week. He was just gone. Then, on March 2nd, he showed up, walking arm in arm to the memorial service. The internet immediately focused on two things. First was the issue of height. Savannah Guthrie is officially listed at 5'10". The FBI's profile of the suspect on the porch was between 5'9" and 5'10". For a month, analysts had argued that Tommaso was too tall to be the person of interest, guessing he was 6 feet, or possibly even taller. But in the video from the memorial, he doesn't seem to tower over Savannah. He stands right beside her, almost at eye level. His official height has never been released to the public, but the clip from March 2nd placed him much nearer to the FBI's estimated range than anyone had ever conceded. The very detail meant to rule him out might not rule him out at all. The second point was his walk. Within a few hours, people started putting the memorial video right next to the FBI's porch video, comparing them frame by frame, analyzing the gait, the motion of the shoulders, the transfer of weight between feet, and the stride. Forensic gait analysis is a legitimate scientific practice. It has been used as evidence in courts in the United Kingdom and is recognized as an up-and-coming tool for identification. But the activity taking place on the internet was not professional forensic gait analysis. It was large-scale pattern matching. Millions of people were viewing the same two clips and developing the same disturbing feeling. I am not here to state what those comparisons prove or disprove. A side-by-side video on a phone is not something that can be used in court. What I will share with you is this. The person who used a device to selectively knock out the cameras aimed at Nancy's house knew the area intimately, understood the angles, and was aware of which sightlines were most important, and knew the layout of the streets so well they could target certain devices on certain sides of certain homes. And Tommaso Cion has been driving down those roads, walking by those homes, and going to that neighborhood weekly for the last 20 years. That is not a formal charge. It is a question that the evidence presents over and over. And the gait comparisons, the height issues, and the signal jamming all point towards someone who wouldn't need to case the Catalina foothills from the outside because they were already living within it. The security system that was meant to keep Nancy safe failed her completely. But the technology that the culprit used to bypass it is what will lead to their identification, because every electronic tool leaves a footprint, and that is precisely what the FBI is searching for now. Leave a comment below and tell me your theory on what was in the suspect's pocket. Was it a walkie-talkie, a deauthentication jammer, or something different altogether? Because the answer to that will tell us if this was a coordinated team effort with active communications or a solo mission using electronic warfare tools. And both possibilities suggest a person who is far more skilled and far more acquainted with that area than the cheap-looking backpack and the ill-fitting holster were intended to make you think. I have been reporting on this investigation since day one. Every single video in this series has pulled back another layer of the mystery. The person walking backward, the 41 minutes, the two distinct DNA profiles, the contradictions from the sheriff's office, and now the electronic disruption. Each piece reveals the same thing, a degree of foresight, knowledge, and precision that is inconsistent with a stranger and inconsistent with one person acting on a whim. The next installment will follow the trail that this episode uncovered, because the central question is not just about who was standing on Nancy's porch anymore. It is about who had enough knowledge of that community to blind it before the whole thing even started. And the answer to that question will reduce the number of possible suspects in this case to a very short list. Someone there in Tucson knows something. This story reminds us of a painful but powerful truth. Evil often does not arrive looking chaotic or obvious. Sometimes it comes prepared, patient, and hidden behind ordinary appearances. That is why communities must never underestimate the value of awareness, connection, and vigilance. Nancy Guthrie's case is not only about fear or mystery. It is also about how every small detail matters. A silent camera, a missing signal, a restless dog, a broken routine, a moment that feels off. These things may seem minor alone, but together they can tell the truth. The lesson is clear. We must pay closer attention to the world around us and never dismiss unusual signs too quickly. This story also teaches us that technology can fail, but human care must not. Security systems, devices, and digital tools are helpful, yet they are not a substitute for strong neighbors, shared concern, and real human presence. A safe community is built not only by locks and cameras, but by people who notice, ask questions, and protect one another. Above all, this case is a reminder to value every loved one while they are here. Time is fragile. Love must be spoken, protection must be active, and silence in the face of danger can cost more than we ever imagine.